Hi guys, today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. So as well as being a nail tech, I'm also a trained jeweller. So today I'm going to show you how I made this sterling silver and tiger's eye ring. So I started by cutting 2 strips of sterling silver wire, both 6 centimetres, which should make a ring size around a UK size S. So I'm just bending the ends round so that they meet and they're flush against each other. I'm going to be setting this beautiful tiger's eye cabochon. I have some fine silver bezel wire which is nice and soft, so I'm just going to wrap that round and then mark where to cut it. If you can hear that noise, that is my pet frog. Before I start soldering, I'm going to paint some borax flux onto the joints. When I melt the solder, it will flow wherever I've painted the flux. So the next bit is the fun bit where we get to play with fire. So I've transferred my pieces onto a soldering block and I am just starting to warm them up with a blowtorch. And then I've cut some tiny pieces of solder wire, and with my tweezers I'm going to carefully put those in place where the joint is. For the soldering to be successful, I need to keep the metal at uniform temperature. So I'm moving the torch round until the whole piece goes that salmon pink colour, and then eventually you will see the solder sort of flow into place. It goes really shiny. Now wait for this sound. Oh, love it. So once I've quenched it in the water and then put it in the pickle pot, which will remove any oxides on the metal, I'm going to cut up these tiny pieces of scrap silver. This is fine silver, and I'm just going to melt them with my blowtorch. They sort of naturally turn into these perfect little balls, and we're going to use those for some 3D elements. So once the rings are out the pickle pot, we need to make them perfectly round again. So I'm putting them over a steel mandrel, and it looks like I'm bashing it really hard. I'm not. I'm just gently tapping all around the outside until they get formed back into perfect circles again. So for the 3D elements, I'm going to be using this tool, which is a shot plate. It's made out of steel, so it's got these sort of decorative indentations. So I'm going to be using taking my tiny silver balls that I made earlier, putting them in there and basically smacking them really hard until they take the shape of the indentations. And then with any luck we can just pop them out, and there we have it. So now I'm going to work out where I want to put all my 3D elements. So I'm just going to place them around and add some beaded wire around the outside as well, because it's super pretty and it ties it all together. And then I'm going to mark out on the silver where I need to cut. So this is a piercing saw, and as you can see the blade is so thin, but it is amazing at cutting through metal. So I've arranged all the pieces back on my soldering block, and I've put flux underneath every piece there so that when the solder melts it will flow underneath and basically stick them down to that back plate of silver. So I'm just warming it up again to that salmon pink colour, and when the solder melts it goes super shiny, so you can see exactly where it's running under all the joints. So now it's going back in the pickle pot, which will dissolve all the oxide and excess flux from the surface of the silver. So I'm now using an even smaller blade on my piercing saw so that I can get in super close to the sides and cut it out as neat as possible, which will reduce the amount of filing and cleaning up I have to do afterwards. To finish the ring shank, I've stacked them one on top of the other, making sure that the solder seams line up one side, and then on the opposite side I've added a small amount of flux and a tiny piece of solder, which then melted. We only wanted a tiny piece because we want to be able to open the ring shank, so we don't want the solder to spread all the way around and basically stick both of them together. I wanted to make an open ring shank on this piece, so I've cut out both the original solder joints, put it in a ring clamp, and I'm just filing that side down flat so it will fit really flush against the back of the ring. So now it's time for the last soldering joint, and with experience this is normally the one where it all goes wrong and the whole thing melts and falls apart, but I'm being optimistic, so trying to keep the whole piece at uniform temperature, which isn't easy because obviously it's a lot bigger now than when we started, but just need those solder pieces to flow into place, and then we're finished with the heat. So I've quenched and pickled it again, and now it's time to take out any imperfections and just generally clean it up. So I tend to have a whole host of drill bits in front of me, and using my pendant motor I just swap around and clean up. So this is the bit that probably takes the longest out of the whole piece, and then I'll finally work my way down with polishing bands to get finer and finer until eventually we can get it to a nice high shine. So for some reason, setting the stone always seems to be my favourite part. I think it's when you can sort of finally see it start to come together and your hard work's paying off. So I'm using a bezel rocker to push the bezel wire over the edges of the cabochon. So I start one side and then I do the opposite, and I go round and round and round until it's nice and smooth and it's got a nice tight seal all the way around. So this step I normally do before I set the stone, but I forgot, so we're going to do it now. So this is liver of sulphur, and this is used to create an oxide on the surface of the silver, which makes it go really dark. So I like to apply it with a Q-tip quite generously and get it into all the little crevices and stuff, and it will basically creates contrast. So all those low areas are going to be dark, and then when I continue to polish the silver, you'll get these bright sort of highlights on the outside. It just gives it a contrast and just makes it a bit more interesting, in my opinion. So I carry on polishing until I'm happy, and there we have it. That is our finished ring. Thanks for watching.